think somebody said it was a 100-year moment. I think it's actually a 1,000-year moment that's happening right now. That God's hand sovereignly is bringing things together to change the shape of how we do human formation. And I think it's relationships, networks, and God's sovereign hand in things like COVID that has really fractured the status quo. So we're seeing things that are just transforming the way that we think about who governs higher education. And that's going to be my focus today. The question is governance. Who governs the formation of our next generations? Is it the state? Is it university presidents and provosts? Those have both proven to be failed stewards. So who governs the formation of our next generation? And I think we have a moment now where we are returning that to the local community of faith. So I'm going to talk about Christian Halls International. This actually is a movement that's taking place with various different organizations. I was pleased to meet David. Been working closely with Lee in Classical Conversations. Lisa Dunn back here, a tremendous partner and friend. And so rather than just focus on what we're doing with CHI, I'm going to give our model first, what we've been doing, just to validate some of these things. And then I'm going to pitch an idea called the Shipyard, which is a collaborative impact framework to say, how do we actually do this at scale? For too long, we've been proprietary and siloed. It's time to start to work together. So, Christian Halls International, how a renewed and unified vision for parent-governed education can catalyze national reform. This is a collective service and training framework. It's not about proprietary product. We need proprietary product. We need evergreen programs that are run for profit, that their toes are held in the fire to maintain their quality. That's part of it. But it's really a collaborative impact framework to say, how do we come around and resource these local communities for what's national change? Christian Halls International, a little bit about myself. If you put everything is biography, right? So if you put my family into a can and shake it up, you've got my Mennonite, Hutterite, Montana farm girl mother, deep, rich community, a pastor in that community since 1560, very deep, rooted communities of faith. And in many ways that DNA has stuck with me because community and family is where all the good stuff happens. It doesn't happen on university campuses, it doesn't happen in Washington. The good stuff happens at home, and it happens in local communities of faith. So that's very much sticky. We then went to Brazil in '94, grew up in the mission field in Brazil. And that gave me a deep passion for local affinity groups and people groups. Every group is different. Working with indigenous groups in North Brazil versus working with German colonies in the South, they're just radically different. But the same thing holds true. Families, communities, churches, businesses, that's the ecosystem that we want to support. So how do we deploy in large-scale networks across those communities? That's very important. And then I'm an academic. I left Brazil to study classics, linguistics, theology, ended up at the University of Oxford, my master's and doctorate there, postdoc Cambridge, and that was really the educational ecosystem in which I was shaped after we finished homeschooling in Brazil. When we moved to Brazil, we had the option, like most missionary kids, you can send your kids off to boarding school. Mom said, heck no, we're not going to do that. That's crazy. So they shipped a shipping container of 5,000 classical books to the North Amazon and built the first classical library in North Brazil. And my mom said, you're going to do two things. You're going to read the greats and you're going to fish peacock bass. And that's what I did. It was much happening. And it was a formational community, but it was one that was rich with the great tradition and the great Christian conversation. So it was after leaving that in North Brazil that I ended up at Oxford, immersed in that Oxbridge tutorial system. I became teacher of, instructor of Greek and New Testament at Wycliffe Hall. And it was in that kind of ecosystem of reading your essays and one-on-one, one-on-three, or one-on-five tutorials over at C.S. Lewis's old offices, at the Kilns. And that was the human formational space that I was immersed in. And that gave me a model for much of what we've built here at Christian Halls. So what is Christian Halls International? It's really ancient innovation, is what I would call it. It's innovation in the fact that we need to break a lot of our current models, but it's ancient in the fact that this is just how Christians have always educated their people. It's a local tutorial ecosystem for K-12 plus university plus the trades. I'm going to be putting a lot of focus on the trades in this conversation. We developed it out of the Oxford tutorial system, but we partner with educational providers. We deploy this in local, small communities. It's very, very similar to what David has been doing. Local churches, local businesses, local homeschool communities, local private schools. And our aim is to produce members capable of fulfilling the responsibility of self-governance. That's what we're trying to do. Everything else are vendors. Okay? And there's a good role for vendors. We need good quality vendors, but it's time to remove the governance from vendors and return it back to families. That's the focus of what we're trying to do with Christian Halls. So what does this look like? First of all, we have to go acquire a good supply chain. K through 12, universities, curriculum and publishing. We've been aggregating now for the past 5 years. Many different curriculum. We have over 400 degree programs from various different universities, dual credit through PhD, because we're in this fascinating moment where our universities have put enormous amounts of funds towards developing products line and supply chain. But they forgot the number one rule of business is that content may be king, but distribution's queen, and she wears the pants, baby. And if you don't have distribution, you know, you're in newspapers. If you don't have distribution, you have nothing. And so we have institutions that have put 10, 15, 20% of their endowment toward content creation, only to think that it's going to be the great savior for their institutions. And then they run into the buzzsaw of Purdue Global putting $30 million this last quarter just to market their MBA program. So how are these small Christian colleges going to compete in the distribution space against these massive universities? So by coming to them and saying, we will build your supply chain, we will build your demand, rather, but you're going to have to turn over governance from the content side to the families. And shockingly enough, our universities begin to buy in. And over the last 5 years, we've acquired over 12 different universities and seminaries, I'll show those later, that they're responsible for content, they're responsible for degrees, but local governance is really the implementation model. And so, great, we've got great supply chain. Our demand side are local families, what we call the private Christian hall. It's private in the fact that it's private, non-governmental. It's Christian in that we're explicitly Nicene, Trinitarian. We leave the local dimensions of that, Presbyterian, Baptist, Catholic, so on and so forth, to those local families because we truly do prioritize local family self-governance. And so by identifying those communities, we're able to say that's where all the good stuff happens. Now the problem that we found is, how do you get supply connected to demand? And so we had to build the field operation team that says, we're going to acquire those licenses, we're going to market, we're going to recruit, and we're going to go get in the field. Well, it just happened to be what we've been pretty good at as a family because we've been in church planning and family engagement really for the last 30 years in Brazil. And so that's allowed us to grow fairly quickly. And we stack these educational ecosystems from K-12, university, and deploy them into the marketplace for these local formational ecosystems. It's very important that we stop thinking about our universities as the destination of human formation. They've proven themselves to be poor stewards of the space. What is a university? People ask me all the time, what's the difference between a Christian hall and a university? A university is really a transactional place where you go away for 4 or 5 years, you get a degree, and you probably never go back. How many people have been back, except for Regent, because it's right here, that have been back to your alma mater? Maybe a couple times, right? But it's a place you go away to and then you leave. We're really thinking about the local community of faith as the formational ecosystem where all the good stuff happens. It's really more akin to the old Beit Midrash, the old synagogue, or the martial arts dojo. What happens when you get your black belt? You just stop? Well, no, you practice your art and you teach. So what does the local community look like? It looks like from K through